Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Beadle, Head of OZone at the Grosvenor Group. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Kate.
Nice to see you again.
And you.
Steve, you've got extensive experience of helping fleets transition to ultra-low emission in your role as head of OZone. And today we're going to be specifically discussing SME fleet decarbonisation. So I'm going to go straight in with the cost of living an energy crisis may be taking its toll on many small businesses. And the fear is that some of them may be putting off the move to zero emission vehicles due to the high upfront cost. What advice would you give them?
Well, initially, I'd say think about your funding method for EVs. There are lots of options available now. Offering your drivers a salary sacrifice scheme is a particularly strong one currently due to the very low benefit in kind tax. And through the savings achieved, employees can move to electric for a lot less when compared to a personal lease. But alternatively, if you currently buy your vehicles outright, and of course, contract hire brings huge benefits with it, with fixed costs, while removing the risk of any forecast sale prices and unknown maintenance bills. But I guess perhaps most importantly, I would urge all SMEs to use a whole life cost or total cost of ownership model for their pricing. There's still a perception that EVs are expensive due to the higher list prices, but when considering all of the financials, EVs will be cheaper than its equivalent diesel or petrol model.
And you mentioned salary sacrifice, and we all know that that's been hugely popular and very successful in terms of driving the uptake of electric vehicles. In terms of the Grosvenor Group, you offer salary sacrifice. Is there a limit on the size of the fleet that you work with?
No, not at all. We've got very small SME fleets up to large corporates. So I'm happy to talk to any size.
And is there an administrative burden? Because clearly a lot of SMEs haven't got the expertise or the time to commit to that kind of scheme.
No, and that's one of the things we sort of identified early on, that companies want to offer, a great benefit for employees, but they don't want any additional risk or administration. So our scheme is designed with those two elements in mind: low administration, minimum risk.
Yeah, good. Okay, so definitely worth looking at, definitely worth speaking to yourselves. And I'm guessing you also would help with the TCO calculation as well for smaller businesses who maybe aren't familiar with how that stacks up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, great. So Steve, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that Lloyds Bank have done a survey recently, and it showed that 77% of small businesses do not have a net zero strategy in place, and 34% of those said it was down to lack of knowledge. So where can SMEs go for support and information when they're embarking on their fleet decarbonisation journey?
Yeah, I think the problem comes back to there's not one size fits all. Every fleet will have a different profiles from the vehicles they need, the areas that they operate in, how they're used, and the mileage they're covering. Can they have workplace charge points, home charge points? The list goes on. But ultimately, I'll just recommend talking to someone impartial who can understand the business and offer relevant advice that can then be implemented. Here at Grosvenor, we've got our OZone team that are always happy to talk to SMEs. Answer any of their questions with no obligation. Through our existing customer base, we can also put SMEs in touch with other businesses who can then share experiences about their own journeys.
That's really valuable, actually, because I think this idea of cooperation and learning from similar businesses, I think, is really, really important. And you're absolutely right that there's really no two fleets are the same. There will always be different circumstances, and especially when you weave in the charging infrastructure element to that.
Yeah, and that like I said, that knowledge sharing is invaluable, and we find that businesses, fleet managers, fleet operators, they only want to help each other. So it's a great opportunity.
Great. And you touched on this in your previous answer, Steve, but let's go into a little bit more detail about the charging infrastructure and the considerations around that, because any business, but especially an SME, there's the opportunity to charge in the workplace, the opportunity to charge at home, the opportunity for public charging. How do they go about understanding what's the best opportunity for them?
Well, I'd never play down how much value really can be had from conducting a brief survey with employees, particularly before you plan any approach. By asking the question, surveying employees, you'll quickly identify those who can charge at home versus those who will rely on workplace as well as the public network. Kind of this approach also allows employees to feel included with any policy change, and I feel will get their overall buy-in a lot earlier. But of course, some businesses won't have the facility to install workplace charge points because there may not be the parking space, maybe in shared offices. So in this case, we then go back to the survey really, because if a driver can't charge at home, they operate in an area where the public network may be limited, then perhaps right now a full EV isn't right for them, and a plug-in hybrid could be a consideration. I was reading just this morning about the charging deserts because of grid capacity in certain areas. So plenty of research is required. But if workplace charging is possible, then commercially, the use of smart chargers will provide lots and lots of data around who's plugged in, when they're plugged in, which will then allow a fair repayment scheme to be implemented.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, this is a really great point, because whilst an SME may have workplace parking, if they rent the property, or indeed if they know that they're not planning to stay there for a long period of time, it's too big an investment to make because they won't get the return on that.
Yeah, and this is always quite a dilemma, because when we're talking to fleets, we always, where possible, recommend future-proofing. Which right now might seem like a false economy, but of course will provide payback further down the line if like say, if premises allow it.
Yeah, and you can take the hardware with you when you move, but I would say roughly half of the cost is in the installation and upgrading the wiring. So you won't get that money back, and that then puts the emphasis, if you've said, on home charging. And not all employees are able to charge at home because they don't have off-road parking, or willing to charge at home, which is something that I think is now coming to the fore as well, particularly with van fleets. Yeah,
and again, coming back to the survey and getting employee buy-in will help with any barriers where there might be unwillingness.
And it's so important to make sure that those vehicles are going to drivers who want them and who are going to really take ownership of the charging of them, because it's not difficult, but it does need a level of commitment and engagement, I think, for that to work. So we've talked about the vehicles themselves, but what other ways can small firms reduce emissions from their transport operations?
I guess it might be slightly obvious, but ways to drive down emissions through encouragement of online meetings. We're still having many meetings with people who are working remotely, so the hybrid working can be encouraged. Car sharing where possible, or carpooling, and then mobility as a solution to encourage more use of the public transport. I guess aside from your own or a business's own travel arrangements, review and consider the third-party suppliers that may be employed to move your goods around. So you might have your own low emission agenda, but through your supply chain, you could still be contributing. So really look internally, but look externally.
It's a great point, Steve, and it's something that I'm hearing much more about. So it's kind of extending the scope of your emissions and the definition of emissions to your supply chain as well. And I think crucially for SMEs, that this is a great area that they need to keep an eye on. But if as an SME, they are a supplier to bigger organisations, they also really need to keep a close eye on that, because those big organisations are going to start asking them about their transport fleet and their emissions. And it could be the difference between winning a contract or renewing a contract in the years to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Steve, that is about all we've got time for. It has been a pleasure talking to you, as always. Thank you very much.
And you, Kate.
Great. And thank you, of course, to the Grosvenor Group for joining GreenFleet Talks. And thank you for watching. Tune in to GF365 again soon.